How can you get your age so wrong?
Oh no, what a shame. What a shame. Here I was preparing a special episode of the show to mark Meghan Markle's 45th birthday. I've got Link Lauren, one of Meghan Markle's biggest supporters in the United States of America, and we were just going to celebrate how this lady has turned 45. And Link, it's just such bad news because all of a sudden, this birthday, this 45th birthday, has turned into an absolute disaster for Meghan Markle.
I think when I was 30, if I thought about 50, I thought that is an awful long way away. And I don't really need to think about it. And then I blinked and I'm 50. That's crazy.
Why are we still here? Just to suffer?
Everything you thought you knew about Meghan Markle's age just cracked open, and the most explosive detail isn't in a document, a headline, or a royal statement. It's in the one silence nobody can explain. Because while the world celebrated candles, captions, and a perfectly packaged number, something underneath didn't sit still. It never has. And this time, the noise got too loud to ignore.
I'm going to quote Tom Bauer by saying, he said, look, we all laughed at Samantha and she was right. And everything she said has come true.
Yesterday, she turned 45. That's the number printed everywhere, repeated like gospel, echoed across every major outlet without hesitation. But within hours, something else started happening, something quieter, sharper, almost ritualistic. People began counting backwards again, and somehow the answers didn't match. They never do. And the question isn't why people are questioning it. The question is why the answers never line up cleanly when they should. Because birthdays are supposed to be simple, aren't they? A date, a year, a fact. So why does this one feel like a puzzle that refuses to lock into place?
Meghan was born, and she was born as a C-section, so she was put in my arm. I was the first person to hold her. Her little hand went on my fingers like that.
For years, the same names have been dragged into this conversation. The father, the half-sister, old classmates, yearbooks pulled out like relics, a magazine page from 1997 that resurfaces every August like it's part of some annual ritual. But here's where it turns. Here's where the pattern breaks, because every single one of those voices shares one thing in common: they weren't the one in the room. And somehow, the one person who was, the one person who doesn't need a record, a document, or a memory reconstructed over time has never been asked.
There's nothing original here.
I hope you're having the best birthday you've ever had. Thank you for everything.
Which is really such a fake.
Think about that. Not once, not in 8 years of relentless coverage, not in documentaries, not in interviews, not in court filings, not even in that polished global Netflix production where every emotion was unpacked in detail. The one question that could end all of this in 4 words never came. And that's not just strange. That's deliberate. Because when something that obvious is missing, it stops being an oversight. It becomes a choice.
What if Meghan Markle was adopted? What if there more to her birth than just her age? Could it be that she doesn't know her own age because she's been lied to by her father and mother? Could it be that's why Doria doesn't have a bond with Meghan Markle? Because what mother leaves her daughter when she's 3 or 4 years?
And then the story shifts into something even more unsettling, because when you line up what the family themselves have put into writing books, legal filings, private emails, you don't get clarity. You get fractures, tiny inconsistencies that on their own look harmless, but together they start forming a pattern that refuses to stay quiet, a date that doesn't match, a number that's rounded when it shouldn't be, ages swapped in a way that collapses under basic arithmetic. These aren't strangers making guesses. These are the closest people to the story, and even they can't keep the numbers aligned. And right in the center of it all stands Doria Ragland, the one witness nobody questions, the one presence that turns speculation into something much heavier. Because this isn't about memory anymore. This is about testimony. A father remembers, a sister calculates, but a mother knows. Instantly, permanently, that moment is etched in a way that doesn't fade, doesn't blur, doesn't get reconstructed years later through documents. So when that voice is missing, not absent, but silent, it changes the weight of everything around it. And then comes the detail that refuses to be ignored. A magazine from March 1997, casually stating an age that pulls the entire timeline backwards. Not by months, by years. Enough to make people pause. Enough to make people ask whether the story they've been given is the only version or just the official one. And suddenly, the conversation isn't just about a birthday anymore, it's about sequence. Because if the timeline shifts, everything attached to it shifts too. Relationships, events, even the narrative of how it all began. And now the contradiction starts stacking. A sister writes one date. A public celebration marks another. A legal filing introduces a number that doesn't quite add up. A private email rearranges ages in a way that doesn't survive even a quick calculation. Each one small, each one explainable on its own, but together they start to feel less like coincidence and more like something slipping through the cracks. And here's where the tension tightens. Because while documents can be filled out, corrected, even misremembered, the absence of a single direct answer from the one person who doesn't need any of them becomes impossible to ignore, especially when that person has already stepped forward, already spoken, already said she was ready to have her voice heard. Ready, but not on this. And just when it feels like the contradictions couldn't stretch any further, the timeline itself begins to crack in a way that doesn't just bend the story, it threatens to rearrange it completely. Because once you take that alternative theory seriously, even for a moment, it doesn't just nudge a date forward or backward, it drags the entire sequence of events into a place where nothing fits the way it's supposed to. Suddenly, the neat version, the one where everything unfolds in a clean, logical order, starts looking almost too perfect, too polished, too controlled. And when you put the two timelines side by side, the contrast becomes impossible to ignore. On one side, there's the official narrative, the one repeated so often it feels untouchable. A meeting in the late 1970s, a whirlwind romance, a wedding in December 1979, and then, neatly placed, a child arriving in August 1981. It's tidy, it's structured. It raises no eyebrows because it was never meant to. But then you slide the other version next to it, the one people keep returning to no matter how many times it's dismissed, and suddenly the math refuses to behave. Because if the birth shifts back even a few years, it doesn't just disrupt the timeline, it breaks it. Completely, it places the arrival before the meeting, before the introduction, before the entire story even begins. And that isn't a minor discrepancy. That's something far more unsettling. That's a story that would have had to be rewritten from the very first page. And right in the middle of that collision stands Doria Ragland again, unchanged, unmoving, still carrying the one detail that could settle everything instantly. Because no matter which version you look at, no matter which document you trust or question, the one constant is that she was there, not nearby, not informed later. There, and yet, even as the debate spirals and the theories multiply, that one direct question remains untouched, like a line nobody is willing to cross, which makes the silence heavier, not lighter. Because the more complicated everything else becomes, the more glaring that absence feels. Then comes the detail that should have been simple, almost forgettable, but instead lands like something much heavier. Her own age at the time, a precise number tied to a publicly recorded date, fixed in a way that doesn't drift or change depending on who's telling the story. 24 turning 25 just weeks later. First child, new marriage, a moment that for most people becomes permanent memory, locked in with absolute clarity. And that's where the unease deepens, because that kind of detail doesn't blur. It doesn't get reconstructed. It stays, which makes the continued absence of that confirmation feel less like coincidence and more like something deliberately avoided. But the story doesn't stop there, because as you move forward, it starts branching into something even more layered. Something that pulls in other moments, other narratives, other details that should have settled their own questions but somehow didn't. Another birth, another account, another version told in a way that sounds complete until you start picking at the edges. Candles in a hospital room, a timeline that compresses itself into something that doesn't quite match reality. Details that feel vivid, almost cinematic, but begin to shift the moment you look at them closely. And once again, the pattern repeats. A story told, a version accepted, and just beneath it, a quiet set of inconsistencies that refuse to sit still. Because that's what keeps happening here. Every time something is presented as definitive, it somehow opens the door to more questions instead of closing them. And every time the focus moves toward documents, filings, or public statements, it drifts further away from the one voice that could cut through all of it instantly, which brings everything back to the same point over and over again, like a loop that won't break. And then, almost buried beneath everything else, comes the moment that reframes it entirely. A statement given years before any of this reached its peak, spoken casually, almost as if it wasn't meant to carry this much weight. An explanation of how the industry works, how age becomes something to manage, something to guard, something to control. And then, within the same breath, a number offered anyway, openly, confidently, as if the rule applied to everyone else, but not here. And that's where the contradiction sharpens into something much more deliberate. Because you can't explain the reason for hiding something and then present it without expecting people to notice the gap between those two positions.